Thank you, Whitney. It's actually a pleasure to be back in Memphis. Both my kids were born in Memphis, and so it's a city that is very close to my heart. And yeah, so I started Project Backboard, and it's been really fun for me to be not just back in Memphis, but back at this particular event because it wasn't until a few months ago that I realized that Project Backboard actually was an arts organization and not a Friends of the Parks organization or not a community health and fitness organization. And so this has been, a really great learning experience for me to kind of think about how I can act as an arts organization to continue supporting artists in the future. But yeah, so Project Backboard, what it is, and there's a picture up here for you to see it. What I do is basically I collaborate with artists to renovate and then install large-scale works of art across public outdoor basketball courts. And yeah, so it was started in Memphis in 2012. I'm sorry, I moved to Memphis in 2012, and I was working for the Grizzlies doing community health and fitness programs. And I'm actually from New York, and one of the things that stood out to me about Memphis parks when I was going around and visiting these different places is most of the parks in the community didn't even have lines on them. And after a few years, I was getting ready to leave Memphis, and I decided my parting gift to the city, what I was going to do, was just go around and start adding lines to outdoor basketball courts. And I had no intention of involving art at all. And it was so I was going out visiting these parks with my stencil and spray painting lines on outdoor basketball courts. And I had actually got to about my 12th court up in Raleigh Community Center, a court up there that had these giant shade structures installed next to the basketball court. And they were created by a Memphis artist, a guy named Anthony Lee. And so I thought, rather than me just picking the colors for the lines, picking the colors for the keys, I'll go talk to Anthony and see if he wants to just come up with what color the lines should be and what color I should paint the keys. And I remember sitting in his studio underneath martial arts and kind of biting my tongue as Anthony quickly draws up an overview for the entire court surface and came up with a design for the entire thing. And I remember thinking, oh man, how am I going to put this on? I didn't have any idea how to do it, but we together we figured out a plan and came up with an approximation of it. And I was really excited by the possibility that his idea had opened up for me. The challenge for me was growing up as a basketball player and someone who enjoyed art but didn't have any art experience beyond high school art classes, was how do I actually engage artists? How do I find artists? How do I work with artists? And I remember that a few months back, I had gone to an art exhibition at the I think it was the Fogelman Gallery at the University of Memphis. It was selections from the Elliott and Kimberly Perry collection. And I had known Elliott in passing through my work with the Grizzlies, and so I thought, well, you know what, I'll just start Googling Elliott Perry art collection and see what artists he supports and what artists he works with, and see if there's anyone whose art I think I can actually paint on a court surface. And that's when I came across Nina Chanel Abney's work, and it really jumped out to me as this would be perfect for an outdoor basketball court. This is, artist I should be working with, someone I should reach out to. And so I emailed Nina, and she was very generous. She was excited about the idea, came up with a design, a new design for the court, came up with a design for the backboards, and we installed it down on the bluff outside the Metal Museum. And that really was the court that jump-started what the work I would do for the next 3 years leading up to now. And actually, since that court went down, other cities that I have worked, I've done other courts in Memphis, I've worked in Los Angeles, I've worked recently in St. Louis, and I've got a bunch of projects coming up in cities all over the country. And other cities that have actually followed in Memphis's lead to install this type of court in their own public parks, that includes New York, Atlanta, Paris, Detroit, Vancouver, really large cities that are following in Memphis to bring art to the community in this way. And so, it's really fun, and I'm going to get into now a little bit of, what my process is and the impact it has and why I think other parks are doing this and why I think it's an important thing to continue. So basically, the way I work in a park is once a location is decided, my first step is to actually renovate the surface of the court. And I'll work with the contractor to fill in cracks in the surface, to fill in any uneven areas, and then to apply 2 coats of resurfacing, and to make it just like a nice, smooth playing surface. And that cost, actually, the actual physical rehabilitation of the space is like 2/3 to 3/4 of the cost of my work. And once we've got a nice, smooth surface, my next step is to work with a piece of artwork to put it onto that surface. The way that happens is we basically put a grid on the artwork, a square grid, and then on the surface of the court, we'll put out usually a 6-foot by 6-foot or 12-foot by 12-foot grid on the surface. And so that I can then, with my limited art ability, basically go box by box and copy what I see on the paper down onto the court surface. Now, sometimes this is me working hand in hand with the artist, but other times when we're done putting out that design, I'll just take a drone shot from the air and send them the photo, and they'll mark up the lines and send it back. Other times they'll take the chalk and go out and mark it up so that the court accurately reflects their vision for the artwork. Once the drawing's approved, our next step is to actually use really a construction material, sports-specific court coloring product to paint the design, basically paint by numbers. And our goal is, in using this material, is that when we leave this court, it's going to have the same maintenance requirements and the same durability as any other colored court in the park system. So those green tennis courts you see, the blue basketball courts, it's going to be the exact same durability and maintenance. And that's, part of that is important to me because when I'm working in a space, I don't want to leave and it just really be about a work of art. I actually want it to be, whether you are interested in art or not, I want you to be able to say, well, at least they made a physical improvement to the overall space. At least we've got a nice new surface that's going to last. And then the other thing in terms of using the same materials is that we're covering the same square footage. So the actual additional cost of working with an artist to create something that's unique and vibrant and that you can really build community connections around is really rather minimal. You don't add that much to your bottom line by getting a creative person engaged in the beginning. And yeah, the last thing that I sometimes get questions about is, well, are these courts a distraction when you're playing on a court that's got a museum quality work of art on it? And actually, coming from very much a basketball perspective and not an art background, when you step onto the courts, the art really just fades into the background. You don't notice it at all. I do believe that you pick up some of the energy from the work of art and from the surface, but it doesn't get in the way of actually playing. And if any of you guys have played athletics in like a multi-use gym, for example, where you've got a gym with basketball lines, volleyball lines, pickleball lines, or whatever, I think those courts can even be more of a distraction than the work that we're doing. And with, in terms of community engagement, what I usually do when we're working on a court project is I'll hire a handful of local assistants, whether that's high school kids or usually high school or college kids who are interested in art and or public art, and give them an opportunity to learn a little bit, give them the opportunity to make a little bit of money in the arts, and kind of just be my right-hand man on any particular project. Then the other thing that happens is I will sometimes engage volunteers ahead of time and try to arrange for some folks to come out and help me out with the painting. But the more fun thing, and then what happens every time, is that you usually get, when you're working in someone's community, out in their public park, people are going to come up and ask you what's going on. And if you come up and ask me what's going on in your public park, you're going to get handed a roller and a brush, and you're going to be put to work helping us put this work of art on the court. And I've had all kinds of fun experiences in that context. There's been times where I've spoken to people one day, the next day they come back with all their paint equipment and bring out their own rollers, bring out their own brushes. I've had guys, that they don't want to mess up their new Jordans, but they'll put those on the side and start painting in their socks. And it's something I look forward to in every project, and not just because I enjoy talking to people and meeting them, but also because I know that the people who are out there of their own free will and just kind of coming up and talking to me and then working, those are the people who are going to care for this space after the court is done and I'm gone and not there all the time. And so just having those community, those concerned community members, being an engaged partner is really important for my work. Other improvements we sometimes do is and especially this was a thing in Memphis, there was a bunch of parks that used to have old cola logos that were on the backboards and old like Dr. Pepper and Sprite advertisements from the 90s, and we covered those up basically with a van wrap with a work of art on it. Install trash cans, that's always a need in any public park. It's like the more trash cans you have, the better. It amazes me, people, they'll walk 5 feet to throw the trash out, but not 20. So you just got to make sure that those are there. And really then anything else we can think of that we can put around the basketball area that's going to make it a more inviting space, more welcoming for community gatherings. So whether that's seating we do, I've done mosaic, like tile work in different parks, really whatever we can think of. And the timeline for our courts, usually it's like the contractor's work takes 3 to 4 days, and my work, adding the art, usually takes between 3 to 5 days. But that said, our process usually, at that time, we've been planning this work 6 to 18 months, sometimes longer. When those first conversations were starting with a public parks department. And the reason that it takes so long is that when you're working in this type of very public space, there's usually not one decision maker who can, put a stamp of approval and say, good to go. Usually there's multiple departments that need to sign off. City council members sometimes there's community meetings, sometimes mayors need to get involved. And so just going through those hoops takes a little while. That said, it's really important for me to be in truly public spaces because part of my goal, part of my mission around Project Backboard is to make these community gathering places. I like the idea of parents playing with their children out on the courts. I like the idea of being open to multi-generational play. And even in my experience growing up in basketball, public outdoor courts were the first time that I, as a younger person, ever really engaged with older people on an equal footing. It was the first time I was interacting with adults who weren't responsible for my health and safety. They weren't my coaches or my teachers and my parents. And on the other side, it was the first time I was dealing with younger people who were not on an equal footing. And so I feel like, the public parks offer a lot of learning experiences for a young person in terms of becoming a citizen and in terms of becoming a community member. So those conversations, usually they're started from a few different ways. Sometimes parks departments come to me. Sometimes I go to a specific parks department with a court in mind. But in a lot of times, especially now, I'll hear from an artist or I'll hear from a community member or a community organization even that says, we think this sort of park would be valuable where we are. And my response tends to be the same to everyone. It's awesome, I'm happy to support, but you need to go find a park that's meaningful for you. A place where either where you're working or where you're from, some place where you have some sort of personal connection to that space. And as long as you as an artist or an arts organization can make that connection to that space, then I've got the experience to help you connect with the Parks Department to get permission, and to connect with possible funders to get the funding, and then even help go through with the installation plan. And actually, that's where I see my growth as an organization, is really being a knowledge source for people who want to see these in their own communities, and doing that more and more, just sharing information, and less of me necessarily needing to visit every court that people are trying to renovate in order to get it done. And it's a very possible thing for people to do, because I don't have any unique art skills when I got started. It's all stuff that I picked up along the way. And so, you know, for anyone out here who's an artist, or even just a community member or a community organization, definitely feel free to reach out if you're interested in maybe collaborating on one of these projects. As far as funding goes, most of my funding, it usually comes from local or regional community or corporate foundations. And I've actually that's one of the things that when you're starting a nonprofit, or really any organization like this, pricing was a challenge for me, and I was really pleasantly surprised to find out that funding, you know, does exist, and there's people who want to support this type of work, especially because it's, I think for a lot of funders, it hits a bunch of different boxes for things that they are looking for. I haven't yet gotten that much national funding, but there actually is a court. If you see one of these courts popping up, there's a court that kind of looks like Matisse-like, and that's over in Orange Mound at Melrose High School. And that was a particularly fun project. I actually had some high school students there who were my paid assistants, and that specific court was funded by the NBA Players Association. So the labor union that represents the NBA players funded that court. And so, you know, they might not know about it, but it's true to say that LeBron James helped pay for that court, or Steph Curry helped pay for that court. And so that was something that was really exciting for some of the folks that were helping me on the project, and just other people who just came out to play on it. And then as far as working with artists, again, any artist who comes to me, I'm going to try to help, and I'm going to encourage you to take an active role in finding a spot that makes sense for you. But there are occasions where I'm asked to help connect an artist to a particular project. And a lot of times and being very new in terms of not having much of an art background, I find out about a lot of artists through Instagram. And that's been, you know, really helpful for me. The other thing that I find has been helpful is artists who have like collectives, either around a specific geography or around a specific sort of idea. If you're an artist and you've got a network of other artists that you're connected with, it's easier for organizations like mine to find you out there and potentially put you with the project. You know, that said, the biggest thing I look for now is local. You know, is it some place that you have context for where your work is going to make sense? You know, in an ideal world, you'd live as an artist, you'd live across the street from the park, and it would be like, you know, it would be that close. But, you know, at least have some neighborhood connection or some connection to the city at large. And then the other thing that I look for artists, style-wise, I don't try to make judgments on good or bad art, but for me, I need to be able to paint your art onto the court surface if we're working together. So there's things that, and then the other thing, in addition to my being able to paint the art in a way that accurately reflects your vision, the art that tends to work best is art that's going to hold up to a certain level of abuse, art that has a particular energy that's going to shine through all those bike tire tracks and spilled soda cans and gum spots and everything, and also just like wear gracefully over the feet pounding up and down. And so I'll look for an artist, if you're working with delicate shading or really fine lines, you might not be the right sort of artwork to be on a basketball court. Unless, like Nike does this sometimes, they do courts like that and they replace it like every 2 years because that's the sort of art, in that case, you kind of need to. The other thing that I'm really looking forward to working more with is, especially as younger artists, female artists, and minority artists. There's a few reasons for that. One is that my commission that I offer is not very large. I usually offer a small flat commission and then an hourly rate for whatever artist is able to, whatever time they're able to commit on site actually helping with the installation. The other side of that though is like it's an opportunity I think for younger artists to show that they can work at scale and to maybe get their art in front of people who might not otherwise be really paying that much attention to art in general, but have, for whatever reason, come across my work and pay attention to what we're doing. As far as female artists, this was something, I didn't really start Project Backboard with any specific intentions around gender equality in parks. But thinking back to my own basketball experience and knowing what it was like playing pickup outdoors, is you realize that like, outdoor basketball courts can be very testosterone-heavy environments. And it's not that young women and girls don't like playing basketball. In fact, it's the most popular sport across all ages and genders. It's just sometimes, I've come to realize through seeing the way young women and girls react to my courts, I've come to realize that sometimes public parks are not inviting for them, especially the basketball courts. And that's been like one of the fun things to learn, is to see the way all users, like the art kind of reboots the space and makes it feel more welcoming to all users. And then the other thing is minority artists. I've had plenty of experiences being the only white person on a basketball court. And so for me, it's important that the artists I work with reflect the people who use basketball courts. And again, I'm not much of, I don't know much about art history, but I'm sensitive to the fact that, or my understanding is that, a lot of public art commissions have historically gone to established white male artists. And so, I think if I can do something to kind of help even the playing field a little bit, that's another thing I'm excited about working on. And then, finally, as far as the impact of these courts, first, I think the public parks where I work tend to be cleaner after I'm done than before. One thing I do is I always ask the artists for permission to put their artwork on a poster. And so when I'm painting, if people come up, I'll give them the poster. One, to let them know what's going on, but also, like, that might be the only way they see the entire vision of the court at any given time. And so, for them to get an overview of what it looks like. But then also, you imagine if you've got a poster of the artwork that's on your local basketball court hanging in your room, maybe when you're out in that space, you are gonna pick up your soda can and put it in the trash. Maybe you're not gonna go tag your graffiti sign on the goalpost. Maybe you're not gonna go out there and start doing donuts in the center of the court, which is, that happens. I see all the times, like this court there, that was like just circle after circle of tire tracks in the middle of that court before we worked on it. Then the other impact that I see is more users, both from the neighborhood and from other neighborhoods, coming into the space to appreciate and enjoy the park. And with that, what usually happens is people who are programming that space, people who have organizations around that space, start looking for ways to use that park to engage those more users who are coming in. The other thing that, for me personally, is important is establishing this idea of individual creativity and connections across different avenues of life, I guess, across art and athletics, or art and whatever else it is you're interested in. And I remember thinking back as a senior in high school, I had this flash of, the only classes I really like coming to every day are my AP art classes. Maybe I should think about, well, should I go to art school? And then immediately, the basketball side of me squashed that and said, no, you're basketball is your real love, you're going to do that. And you know, I went to college and played basketball and learned a lot from that, but I didn't have any role models that I could look at and say, oh, you can be an athlete and an artist, or you can be an artist and you know, whatever else. And so, you know, I'm hoping that through this process, I'm kind of opening up this idea that you can be an artist and whatever else. You don't have to give up interest in art because, you know, you're an accountant or whatever. And then it's also just, you know, the shock of seeing these things in person. And I'm even used to them. I'm the one who paints them. I still get shocked when I walk into these parks and see these courts. You know, I hope that there's, on some level, it gets people to think more creatively about what their environment is and what they can do to change that environment to more fit what they want it to be. And the last impact I see is it does change the narrative around the space. You know, that triple court you see up here with all the bright colors on here, that's in a place called Kinloch, Missouri. And when I was engaged to do that court, I was Googling Kinloch Park, and this is the first hit on Google was, the town next to Ferguson, Missouri is even more depressing. And then every article about Kinloch, Missouri was about the police chief spending 8 months in prison, and the fire department's corrupt, and all these negative things about the community that surround the park. But you didn't get the positive stuff about that community. And now, you know, in part through this project and some of the attentions it's got, you know, now Kerry, who's a local barber who's been hosting the 3-on-3 tournament on that park for, you know, years before I showed up, now he's quoted at length in articles talking about what the neighborhood means to him and other people there, and what the importance of the park and basketball. And now Kerry's tournament this summer, it went from a one-day, you know, being a one-day tournament. Now it's going to be a 3-day tournament with they're releasing a documentary about the city that's coming out at the same time. And this is stuff that was already in the works. There was already committed people who loved that community before we did the project, but that narrative about the good stuff about that town or about that city was buried underneath all this other stuff. So I think, you know, in some small way, this project helped bring some of those positive stories closer to the light. You know, and lastly, because I think it's got the power to do that in parks, for me, working in public spaces, I really take the responsibility of public art very seriously. And from my perspective, the purpose of art, right, is to help people structure thoughts, ideas, and emotions and feelings. And, you know, I think powerful art can cover the whole range of human thought and feeling. But for these spaces, I'm really focused on powerful, positive art that really has a strong positive energy and is beautiful in a traditional sense. And, you know, in our engagement process, I talk to people locally. I ask the artists to talk to people locally. And you know, by the fact of trying to find the local artists, I think also helps in terms of creating a piece of art that's sensitive to the context of that community. But you know, one thing that I don't do, or I haven't done before, I'll say, is haven't typically gathered a bunch of input from community, handed that off to an artist, and say, you know, now come up with a design. My personal feeling about art is that it should, when it's really powerful, it shows us something that we didn't otherwise know how to see, or something we didn't know how to ask for, or we weren't able to otherwise express. And so, you know, because my work depends on the art that actually goes on the surface, I want to give artists the freedom to use their creativity and use the genius of an artist in a way that moves the conversation forward and not just reflects where the conversation is already at. One of the biggest things I've learned and I've been surprised by, and I hope one of the things I hope everyone here leaves with today is the thought about how you, as whether you're a curator, a collector, or a creator, how can you be more engaged in the community in in terms of having like really specific human experiences connected to your artwork. What I think you'll find is that like the more human experiences that a work of art recalls for you, the more value it's going to have for you. At the same time, it's also possibly introducing someone else to a creative life. And for me, like not having owned any original art before I started Project Backboard, not having known anyone who owned original art before I started this work, I now at this stage I own works of art that I consider just about priceless, because when I look at them, yes, I see the shapes and the colors and feel the emotions that the work itself brings out of me. But on a much deeper level, that work is now about the people who I've had shared experience with, and the people I've made connections to. And so, I think, in your work, whatever that means, as far as connecting others to it, I think you'll get more than the value back for what you put out there in terms of your effort to make your art a more social practice. And then, the other part of that too, though, I'm not encouraging people to see, I'm not trying to tell you to try to solve a social ill or something with your art practice. And I think, while I believe my work has a positive impact, and I have to argue that for grants, et cetera. If you were to actually ask me, like, what's the core of why I do it, it's really because I think it's cool to have basketball courts like that. I think it's fun. Like, that's the type of place I want to play. So it's almost, I'm saying it more from almost a selfish perspective of sharing the things that you love and enjoy with others in a way that is sensitive to that community. But yeah, so that's with that. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope we have some either comments or questions from anyone who'd like to have something to say at this point.